I was sitting in my old pickup engine off watching my own house like it already belonged to someone else. Inside, my family was having a meeting. Without me. I heard my wife say at first, calm and certain. He's useless now. My son talked about moving on. My daughter said nothing at all. That was the moment something settled in my chest. Silence doesn't buy you peace. It teaches people how to erase you. They weren't angry. They were organized. Talking about downsizing, making things easier, deciding what to do with a future where I no longer existed. So I stayed right there, hands tight on the steering wheel, listening. Because once you realize you've already been written off, you start seeing everything differently. I sat in my old pickup with the engine off, and my hands resting on the steering wheel, like I was waiting for a light to change. The sun was low over Plano, turning the roofs on our street the color of old copper. Across from me, the house looked the way it always did from the curb, clean brick white trim, a yard Linda kept clipped so tight it could have been combed. $1.2 million of calm. That is what it looked like from the outside. I had parked 2 houses down so nobody could spot me through the front windows, unless they were trying. The air smelled like cut grass and somebody's dinner starting up. I could hear a sprinkler ticking somewhere. A dog barked and then stopped like it had remembered it had manners. I told myself I was only here because I forgot my phone charger. That was the lie I used to get my body to turn the wheel and come back. The truth was uglier. The truth was I needed to know what they said when I was not in the room. I had been gone less than an hour. I drove to Lowe's for a few things we did not even need, and walked every aisle like a man trying to burn time instead of money. I came home, saw Ryan's truck in the driveway, and Emily's little SUV behind it, and I kept driving. Now their vehicles sat there like they owned the place, like they belonged there more than I did. The front room lights were on. From this angle I could see the glow through the blinds and the outline of people moving. Not much. A shoulder, a head, someone lifting an arm. The kind of ordinary movement that would have meant nothing to me a year ago. I rolled the passenger window down just enough to hear, and the first thing that reached me was Linda's voice, low and controlled, the same voice she used when she talked to the plumber or the HOA. We cannot keep waiting for him. She did not sound angry. She sounded tired. Then Ryan, sharper. He is useless now. He is 62, Mom. He is done. We need a plan. There was a small pause, the kind that means someone looked at someone else, checking if the cruelty landed. Emily spoke next, and her voice had that careful, practiced sweetness she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. Dad means well. He just does not see what things cost anymore. He does not get how the world works now. I closed my eyes for a second. Not long. Just long enough to feel my heartbeat in my throat. They were talking about me the way you talk about a broken appliance. Like I used to be useful, and now I was taking up space. I could have pulled away right then. I could have driven around until they left and walked into my own house pretending I had been out all day. Instead, I sat there and listened, because there is a point in a man's life where pain starts to feel like proof. Proof that you were right to suspect what you suspected. Linda again. We need to be smart. I am not throwing your father out on the street. Ryan's laugh came through the screen door like a slap. We are not throwing him out. We are moving him. That is different. There are nice places, close to medical. He can have his little routines. Emily added something soft, like a cushion under a blade. And if he is happy, he will stop fighting everything. He will stop making us feel like the bad guys. I swallowed. The inside of my mouth went dry. I had not been fighting anything. Not really. I had been asking questions. I had been saying, "Slow down, Fonz, why are we doing this? Can we talk about it?" I had been trying to understand the decisions being made around me like I was a guest in my own life. That is what hit me hardest. Not the word useless. Not even the fact that my wife and kids were sitting at my dining table running numbers on my future. It was how normal it sounded to them. As if the only thing missing from the plan was my consent. As if consent was an inconvenience. I watched the living room shadow shift someone leaning forward. The front door was closed, but the sound carried in pieces through the seams and the air. Ryan said something I could not make out, then caught the end. The house should not be tied up with him. It is our future, too. Our house. Our future. I felt my fingers tighten around the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I had to force myself to breathe slowly, like I was back on a job site watching a crane swing a load over men's heads. Slow breath. Clear mind. No sudden moves. A year ago, I would have walked in. I would have stood in the doorway and said, "What is this, and why am I hearing my own life discussed like a budget item?" But over the past few months, I had learned something about my family. When you ask them directly, they deny. When you push, they accuse. When you back off, they go back to work on whatever they want. It did not start today. It started in little moments that were easy to excuse. The time Linda signed us up for a new internet plan without saying a word, then told me after the fact that I would not understand it anyway. The time Ryan stopped calling it Dad's garage and started calling it storage. The time Emily joked at dinner with her phone in her hand saying, "You know how Dad is, he still thinks a gallon of milk is $2. They laughed. I laughed too, because that is what you do when you are still trying to belong. I retired in 2020. 30 years in civil engineering, bridges and subdivisions, highways that people drive without thinking about the men who made sure the ground holds. I did my part, I paid my dues. I came home every night. I went to Little League games and parent-teacher conferences. I missed out on promotions because I did not want to travel. I told myself that was what a good husband and father did. When I stopped going to the office, it was like someone turned the volume down on my existence. At first it was peaceful, then it was quiet in a way that made you uneasy. If you are a man, you know that quiet. You know the kind that creeps in when nobody needs you for anything anymore. Linda kept asking if I was bored. Ryan kept offering to help with things I did not need help with. Emily started sending me articles about senior living like it was a joke that was also a warning. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself they were adjusting. I told myself I had earned a little rest. But sitting there with the window cracked, hearing my wife say, "We cannot keep waiting for him," I understood something that had been circling me for months, like a bird I refused to look up at. They were not adjusting to my retirement. They were adjusting to a world where I was not in charge anymore. I heard a chair scrape. Linda's voice softened, but it did not soften for me. It softened for the conversation. "Michael is stubborn. We need to do this carefully. If he thinks we are taking things away, he will dig in. Ryan said we are taking things away. We are just doing it before he wastes what is left." Emily made a small sound, maybe agreement, maybe discomfort. Then she said, "Maybe we should talk to Thomas. You know, a lawyer, just to see what options are." My stomach turned at the name, even though they had no idea what it meant to me. Thomas Reed was an old friend. We played football together back in high school. We kept in touch over the years, mostly Christmas cards and quick calls. I had not seen him in person in a long time. Hearing my daughter suggest they bring in a lawyer to talk about options made my skin feel tight over my bones. Options. Like I was a problem to solve. I looked at our front porch at the welcome mat Linda bought last spring that said "Home" in big block letters. It was just a word printed on rubber, and it suddenly felt like a lie. I could have driven away and pretended I did not hear a thing. I could have walked inside and confronted them and watched their faces shift into innocence and offense. Instead, I stayed still. I kept listening until the words started to blur together, until I could no longer tell which sentence hurt the most, because the pain was not in any one line. It was in the pattern. They had been making decisions without me. They had been testing how far they could push. They had been waiting for me to stop pushing back. And I realized something else, something even colder. They were not turning on me in that moment. That moment was simply the first time they stopped pretending they were not. I put the window back up slow. I sat there with the glass sealing me off from my own home. My chest felt tight, but my mind was strangely clear. If this house was no longer a home to them, then it was time I stopped calling it one too. I stared at the front door until my eyes burned. Then I started the engine and let it idle. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed a second to decide what kind of man I was going to be when I walked back inside. I put the truck in drive and rolled past my own driveway like it belonged to someone else. I looped the block once, twice, letting the neighborhood blur in the windshield mailboxes and porch lights, and the same December lawns I had mowed for years. When I finally came back, Ryan's truck was still there, Emily's SUV still wedged behind it, and the porch light threw a soft circle over the welcome mat, like nothing inside could ever be unkind. I parked in the driveway anyway. I walked up the steps, shoulders squared, face set in that neutral way men learn when they do not want anyone to read them. The front door opened on the first turn of the knob. Linda never locked it when the kids came over. Trust, she used to call it. The voices stopped the moment I stepped in, like a radio turned down fast. Ryan sat at the dining table, elbows wide, owning the space. Emily was on her phone, thumb hovering, eyes flicking up as if she had been caught doing something small. Linda stood by the kitchen island with a glass of water she did not drink. "There you are," Linda said. "We were just talking." "About dinner?" I asked. Emily offered a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We were deciding what to do for the holidays." Ryan nodded like he was doing me a favor. "Yeah, just logistics." I looked at the table. A legal pad. A pen. My old calculator, the one I kept in the drawer by habit. "Logistics, sure." I said I'm going to wash up, then I walked down the hall and let the bathroom door click shut behind me. I turned on the faucet and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Same gray at the temples, same crease between my eyebrows that had deepened since retirement. I was 62 years old, and I felt like a guest in a house I built with my own hands. When I came back out, the pad was gone. Ryan was talking about the Cowboys like he always did when he needed the room to feel normal. Linda moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, closing them, keeping busy. Emily looked at me with that careful expression people wear around someone they think is fragile. I made it through the rest of the evening on muscle memory. Small talk, polite nods, a laugh in the right place. I waited until their taillights disappeared, then I stood in the quiet of the living room and listened to the air conditioner cycle on and off, like it was trying to fill the space. That night, I lay awake and let the past come in, not like a movie, more like a series of receipts I had never looked at closely. I could tell you the dates of big projects I worked on, the year we moved to Texas, the year Ryan graduated. I could tell you the month we signed the papers on this house. I could tell you the exact week I stopped being asked. Back in 2010, I was already a senior engineer with a civil firm off the Dallas North Tollway. It wasn't glamorous work. It was subdivisions, drainage plans, retaining walls, the kind of projects that kept cities from sinking into their own mud. The kind of work you only notice when it fails. I was good at it. My bosses knew it. They offered me a promotion that would have pushed me into management. More travel, more meetings, more money. Linda wanted me home. Ryan was playing baseball then. Emily was still small enough to fall asleep in the back seat after church. I told my boss I'd pass. I told myself family mattered more than titles. I believed it too. In 2013, the firm got acquired. There was a payout for those of us who'd held stock. Nothing like the numbers you see on the news, but enough to change a man's life if he used it right. I remember sitting at this very table, papers spread out, the smell of Linda's coffee, her finger tapping the line that showed the final amount. We could finally upgrade, she said. Not a bigger house, a better one. A neighborhood where the kids don't have to apologize for where they live. I wanted to pay down the mortgage we already had, build a cushion, take my time. Linda had a talent for making big decisions sound like care. She wasn't wrong about wanting better for the kids. She just learned over time that wanting could become a kind of entitlement. In 2014, we bought the house in Plano. Good schools, quiet street, a backyard big enough for a dog we never had time for. The listing price made my stomach flip, but I signed because I believed I was buying my family a future. We walked through the empty rooms and Ryan ran up the stairs like he owned the place already. Emily stood in the primary bedroom and said it felt like a grown-up house. Linda put her hand on my arm and said, "You did good, Mike." It was one of the last times she said it like that with pride. For years after that, my life became a pattern. Leave early, come home late, keep the lights on, pay the taxes, fix the fence when the wind took it down, take the car in when the check engine light came on. The steady work of being the man of the house even when no one called it that anymore. Linda handled the daily spending groceries bills, the little things that add up and never get noticed. She liked control, but in those years it didn't feel like control. It felt like partnership. If she wanted a new sofa, she got it. If the kids needed braces, we paid for it. If Emily wanted to try a new dance studio, we wrote the check. Ryan grew into a confident young man, the kind who could talk his way into and out of anything. Emily grew into someone who knew how to present herself, how to smile in photos, how to make the world pay attention. I was proud of them. I still am, in the complicated way a father can be proud of someone who has hurt him. Then 2020 came, and the world shut down, and something inside me decided I was done running. My knees hurt in the mornings. My back tightened if I stood too long. I had put 3 decades into work that no one applauded. Retirement felt like something I'd earned. At first, Linda treated it like a novelty. She'd find me in the garage and ask if I was bored. She'd suggest projects. She'd make lists. Ryan started dropping by more often, offering to help with things I'd been doing my whole life. He would reach for the tools before I even asked. "I can take care of that, Dad," he'd say, in a tone that sounded supportive, but carried something else underneath. Something like he was practicing. Emily began talking to me like I was fragile glass. She'd explain simple things slowly, like she was teaching a child. She'd send me links to articles about staying active after retirement, about downsizing, about planning the next stage. The first time she did it, I laughed. The second time, I didn't. Linda changed in a quieter way. She stopped asking. She started informing. "I scheduled the AC maintenance for Thursday," she'd say. "I told Ryan to handle the lawn service, it's easier. We're thinking about remodeling the downstairs so it's more functional." Thinking. When I questioned it gently, she'd tilt her head and give me that look that made me feel like I was slowing everyone down. "Mike, you don't need to worry about that. Let me handle it." I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were adjusting. I told myself my job now was to keep the peace because that's what I'd always done. My silence became a habit, a way to avoid arguments, a way to avoid seeing disappointment on Linda's face, a way to avoid the sharp edge in Ryan's voice when he thought I was being unreasonable. The problem with being quiet is that people start to believe you have nothing left to say. By late 2022, I noticed the small exclusions. A family dinner planned without checking my schedule. A weekend trip discussed like I'd automatically stay behind. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room, then restarted with safer words. And now tonight, I had heard the real ones. Useless now. Options. We cannot keep waiting for him. It settled in my chest with a weight that wasn't rage exactly. It was clarity. In the dark, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow. I thought about the name Emily had mentioned almost casually, like it was just another item on a list. Thomas, a lawyer. I realized my family had already started planning their next step, and for the first time in a long time I understood that doing nothing was still a decision. It was just a decision that always benefited someone else. I reached over to the nightstand and picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts, over a name I hadn't called in years. Thomas Reed. I didn't press it yet. I just looked at it, letting the idea take shape, letting it settle into the same part of me that used to hold blueprints and deadlines and hard choices. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, and inside my own house I finally admitted the truth. My silence hadn't kept the peace. It had only made room for them to speak without me. The next morning I made coffee and drank it standing at the kitchen sink, watching the backyard like there was something out there that could explain what had changed inside this house. Linda moved around behind me, opening drawers a little too softly, closing cabinets a little too gently, like she was trying not to wake up a sleeping animal. She asked if I wanted eggs. I said no. She asked if I was feeling all right. I said I slept fine. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie our marriage had learned to accept. Over the next few days, I paid attention in a different way. I stopped filling the silence with small talk. I stopped trying to smooth things over. I listened and I watched, and I let people show me who they were when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Ryan came by on Tuesday evening with a roll of blueprints under his arm, like he was arriving at a job site. He laid them on my dining table, without asking, the same table where he used to do homework, the same table where I signed loan papers and school forms and checks for braces. He tapped a page with his finger and looked at Linda, not at me. If we open this wall up, we can make the living area feel bigger. Then we redo the flooring, something light, something that photographs well. It will raise the value. Linda nodded like they were discussing paint colors in a catalog. That sounds nice. I stood in the doorway, hands in my pockets, and waited for someone to remember I existed. Emily walked in a few minutes later, phone already in her hand, hair pulled back, eyes scanning the room like she was deciding where the best light was. She looked at the plans, then at me, and smiled as if she was being kind. Dad, you should be excited. The house could use an update. Could it? I asked. Ryan didn't answer the question. He kept talking, voice steady, confident, explaining the budget like he was presenting to clients. He mentioned contractors he knew. He mentioned timelines. He mentioned what buyers wanted these days. At one point he said, "And this will be a good investment for us." For us. I waited again for the moment when someone would add, "If you agree." Or "How do you feel about it, Dad?" Or even, "Do you want any part of this?" It never came. Emily snapped a photo of the plans, then another of the living room, angling the camera so the couch looked newer than it was. She posted it while she stood there, thumbs moving fast, face relaxed. Later that night after they left, I checked her page. There it was, a bright picture of my living room, and a caption about family projects, about making our space our own, with little hearts and comments from people I didn't know, telling her how lucky she was. Our space. Our own. I sat on the couch and stared at the screen until it dimmed. I thought about all the Saturdays I had spent fixing things around this house, not for recognition, not for applause, but because it was mine to care for. It was my responsibility, my pride. And now my kids talked about it like a backdrop, like a set. On Thursday, Linda told me she had scheduled a meeting with a designer. She said it like she was reminding me of a dentist appointment. It's just to get ideas, she said. Ryan knows a woman who does great work. No pressure. No pressure. The words landed heavy because they were meant to sound harmless. I nodded. I even thanked her. That was the man I had been. A man who stayed quiet because he believed quiet was love. That afternoon, I took my truck and drove to a small office building near downtown Plano, where I knew Thomas Reed kept his practice. I did not tell Linda where I was going. I did not tell anyone. I told myself I was just getting information. I told myself it was responsible. The real reason was simpler. I needed to know where I stood because I could feel the ground shifting under my feet. Thomas's receptionist was young, polite, the kind of person who could make you feel old without meaning to. She asked my name, then her eyebrows lifted just a fraction when she realized who I was. "He's expecting you, Mr. Carter. Right this way." Thomas stood when I walked in. He had gone gray around the temples too, and he carried his weight a little softer than he used to, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, warm, honest. "Mike," he said, and the name sounded like the past. "It's been a long time." We shook hands, and for a moment I felt something in my chest that surprised me. Relief, maybe, at being seen without being measured. He offered me coffee. I said no. My stomach was tight, and I didn't trust it. We sat down and he studied my face. "You don't just stop by to catch up," he said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "I need to ask you about my house." Thomas didn't react like a man hearing gossip. He reacted like a man hearing a problem he could solve. "Tell me what's going on," he said. I didn't give him everything. Not at first. I told him I was retired, that my family had started making plans without me, that I wanted to understand my options. I used that word too, and I hated it as soon as it left my mouth. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. "All right. Let's keep this simple. Who is on the deed?" I blinked. It was such a plain question, so practical, it made my situation feel both smaller and more serious at the same time. "I think it's me," I said. "It should be me." "Think is not the word we want here," Thomas said. "We want no." He opened a folder, slid a pad of paper toward me, and told me what to bring. The closing documents, if I had them. The latest property tax statement. The mortgage payoff letter, if there was one. Anything with official letterhead. Anything with my name on it. "You can start with the county records too," he said. "Most of it is online." I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind moving fast. At a red light, I stared at the line of cars and realized something bitter. My family talked about the house like it was theirs, but none of them had ever asked the one question that mattered. Who is on the deed? That evening, while Linda watched television, I went into the study and pulled the file box from the closet. It was heavier than I expected, full of papers I had not touched in years. I sat at the desk and opened it like I was opening a time capsule. There were tax statements, insurance policies, The original closing packet thick and neatly tabbed. I found the deed. My name was there, printed clean and clear. Michael Carter Grantee. No trust name, no transfer language, no shared ownership tucked in the margins. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't feel triumph. But I felt something colder, the way you feel when you confirm a suspicion you were hoping was wrong. The next day, I met Thomas again, documents in hand. He spread them out on his desk, checked the county record on his computer, then called in a favor from someone he knew at a local bank. He kept it calm, methodical. No speeches, no drama. After a few minutes, he looked up at me. "The house is in your name, Mike. Clear as day. The purchase funds trace back to your stock payout and your income. There's no trust involved, no transfer. Your family can talk all they want, but talking doesn't change records." I stared at the paper like it was both a shield and a mirror. Thomas continued, voice measured. "That doesn't mean you can ignore the human part of this. But legally, you should understand this. You are not powerless." I heard the words, but what hit me was what they implied. All those conversations at my dining table. All that certainty in Ryan's voice. All that casual ownership in Emily's captions. It was built on an assumption they had never bothered to verify. They had been living in a story where I was already gone. I left Thomas's office and stood in the parking lot for a moment, phone in my hand, sun bright on the asphalt. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. Power, I realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't the person who talked the most at the table. It was the person whose name was on the paper everyone else ignored. When I pulled into my driveway, Linda's car was there, and Ryan's truck was already parked along the curb. Through the window, I saw them at the kitchen island, heads closed, the same posture they had when they made decisions without me. I sat in my truck for a second longer, my hand on the folder beside me, and I wondered what they would do if I walked in and spoke like I meant it. I stayed in the truck a moment longer, the folder resting on the passenger seat like a quiet weight. Then I picked it up, slid it under my arm, and stepped out into the afternoon heat. The front door opened before I reached it. Linda was already there, smiling the way she did when she wanted to control the tone of a conversation before it started. "You're home early," she said. I nodded and stepped inside. Ryan stood at the kitchen island, phone in hand. Emily sat on a stool, legs crossed, listening more than talking. They all looked at me at once, then away like children who had been caught, but had agreed not to say what they were caught doing. I set the folder on the counter and walked past it without opening it. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that kind of noise. The next few weeks unfolded slowly, not with explosions, but with pressure, like a hand tightening around something soft until it changed shape. Linda was the first to stop pretending. One evening, she poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter watching me rinse a plate. "I've been thinking, Mike," she said, "about what's next for us." I waited. This house is a lot. The upkeep, the stairs, the taxes. It might be time to consider something smaller, something more manageable. Her voice was gentle, almost caring. She wasn't asking. She was preparing me. I dried my hands and turned to face her. "Smaller where?" She shrugged like the details were already settled somewhere else. "There are nice places around here. Single level, close to clinics. It would be easier on you." "On me." Ryan joined in soon after, like he had been waiting for his cue. "From an investment standpoint, it makes sense, Dad. The market's good right now. We could sell while values are high and reposition." "Reposition what?" "Us," he said, and smiled. The smile he used with clients. Emily didn't argue. She didn't defend me either. She sat there scrolling, nodding along, absorbing the conversation like it was weather. I said very little, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear how far they would go without me pushing back. They went far. Ryan started talking about timelines. Not if, when. If we list in spring, he said we could close before summer. That gives us time to plan the next move. The next move. Linda added that she had already looked at a few communities online. She said it like it was something helpful she had done for me. They spoke in complete sentences, confident and clean, like people who had rehearsed. What struck me was how rarely they used my name. I was discussed, not addressed. I watched their faces while they talked. Linda's eyes flicked to Ryan for approval. Ryan's voice dropped when he mentioned money. Emily's silence grew heavier, not with guilt, but with acceptance. This wasn't a conversation forming. It was a decision being explained. Outside our walls, the story started to leak. I noticed it first in small ways. A neighbor who waved longer than usual. A woman across the street who asked if everything was all right, her voice pitched just high enough to sound concerned. Then one morning while I was getting the mail, Karen Mills from 3 houses down stopped me on the sidewalk. "Michael," she said, touching my arm. "I heard you might be making some changes. Big ones." I looked at her face and saw it there, the pity she hadn't meant to show. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then pressed on like she had already committed. "Linda mentioned you might be moving soon. Downsizing. It's such a big step, especially at your age. At your age." I smiled the automatic one and told her we were just talking, nothing decided. She nodded, relieved like she had done her duty by checking on me. I walked back inside with the mail and set it on the counter without opening it. The house felt smaller, not because of its size, but because my place in it had shifted. They weren't just making plans. They were telling people about them. I started keeping track. Not in a notebook. In my head. Linda stopped saying our bedroom. She said the primary room. Ryan referred to the garage as his workspace. Emily talked about the backyard like it was content, not ground. One afternoon, I overheard Linda on the phone, her voice low, reassuring. "He'll come around," she said. "He always does." That was the moment it clicked. They weren't worried about my reaction. They were managing it. I didn't confront them. Not because I was afraid, but because confrontation would have given them what they expected. Emotion. Resistance. Something to label as stubbornness or confusion. Instead, I watched them operate like a Unit 1 I was no longer part of. At night, I lay awake and replayed their words not with anger, but with precision. I noticed how they framed things, how they spoke about my future without asking about my present, how they used concern as leverage. They had already decided I was a problem to be solved. The clarity didn't hurt the way the first realization had. It settled in steady and cold. I wasn't being pushed out in a moment of conflict. I was being replaced through a process. And I was letting it happen by staying quiet. One evening, as Ryan stood at the counter explaining again how much sense all of this made, he said something that finally cut through the fog. "We need to think about what's best for everyone," he said. "And that includes making sure the house isn't tied up with decisions you don't need to be worrying about anymore." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't being cruel. He believed what he was saying. He believed the story where I was already fading. That night after they left, I walked through the house room by room. Not like a man saying goodbye, but like a man taking inventory. I ran my hand along the doorframe, where I had marked Ryan's height when he was 12. I stood in the kitchen where Linda and I had planned holidays and budgets and futures. I stepped into the study and looked at the empty desk. This wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about care. It was about control. They had planned my exit before I planned anything at all. I went to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I had put the folder. I didn't take anything out. I just placed my hand on top of it, feeling the edges through the paper. For the first time, I understood that observation had its limits. Sooner or later, a man has to decide whether he is being patient or whether he is being erased. And I knew I was close to that line. And the strange thing was how calm I felt once I finally admitted it. The next morning, I didn't raise my voice or throw accusations across the kitchen. I made coffee, fed the dog we never got in my head, and then I drove to Thomas Reed's office with the folder on the seat beside me. Thomas looked up when I came in and read my face the way old friends can. "You're ready," he said. I sat down and slid the folder across his desk. "I want to do this clean," I told him. "I don't want a war. I just want my life back." He nodded once, like that was the only sane request a man could make. "Then we keep it boring," he said. "Boring is good. Boring holds up." For the next few weeks, my world narrowed to paperwork and quiet steps. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was the steady work of putting boundaries into a form the world respected. Thomas pulled county records, confirmed the chain of title, and checked for anything that could surprise us. He had me sign a few authorizations so he could talk to the bank and the title company on my behalf. He explained what would happen and when not, with fear, just with order. He also told me one more thing, low and plain. "Do not announce anything until you are ready to follow through," he said. "Once you speak, you can't take it back." I left his office feeling like I had stepped onto solid ground after months of walking through fog. The next stop was Jason Miller, a loan officer Thomas trusted, the kind of guy who wore a clean polo and kept his desk neat enough to make you feel like you should apologize for your own life. Jason was in his 40s, polite, careful, and he spoke in simple terms without talking down. He looked at my documents and walked me through the numbers. There was no mortgage on the house anymore. We had paid it off a couple years before I retired. The property taxes were current. The insurance was current. Everything that mattered was steady. Jason told me I could list the house without a fight, and that if I wanted to, I could set the process up so the sale moved on my timeline, not anyone else's. He didn't say the words control, but I heard them in every sentence. When I left, the sun was bright, and the air smelled like hot concrete. I sat in my truck and let my hands rest on the wheel the way they had the night I listened outside my own home. This time my chest wasn't tight. It was quiet inside me, the kind of quiet that comes before you do something you've been avoiding for years. At home, I acted normal. That was the hardest part, not because I felt guilty, but because I had spent so long swallowing my truth that speaking it felt like a foreign language. Linda kept up her routine. She talked about looking at townhomes. She mentioned neighborhoods like she was collecting them. She used the word easier the way a person uses perfume, a little spray over something that has started to smell. Ryan came by twice, always with a new angle. One day he brought numbers about market trends. Another day he showed me photos on his phone of single-story places near a golf course, as if that would sweeten being moved like furniture. Emily stayed quieter. She watched my face more. I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like she was trying to figure out whether I was sad or confused. If she was waiting for weakness, she wasn't going to get it. 2 weeks into the process, Thomas called me. "We're ready to list when you say the word," he said. "I've got a realtor lined up, someone discreet. We can get photos done, schedule showings. You set the pace." I said, "Give me a little more time." Not because I was hesitating. because I needed the timing to be mine. The night I decided to tell them I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy. Chicken in a skillet, green beans, the kind of meal Linda used to make when the kids were younger. It was my way of reminding myself that I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I had been erased in my own house and I was done cooperating with that. When Ryan arrived, he walked in like he belonged, calling out before he even shut the door. "Smells good, Dad." Emily followed, carrying a bag of salad like she was playing a role. Linda set plates without looking at me, her movements crisp, controlled. We sat at the table. For a moment, it was almost normal. Ryan talked about a listing he'd closed. Emily mentioned a brand deal. Linda asked if I wanted more water. I let them finish. I watched their faces. I remembered the phrase Karen Mills had used, "big step," especially at your age, and I felt something settle in me like a latch clicking shut. I put my fork down. "I've made a decision," I said. 3 sets of eyes lifted to me at once. Linda's mouth opened slightly, ready with a question that would guide my answer into the lane she preferred. Ryan leaned back, already preparing to argue. Emily's hand paused over her glass. I kept my voice even. "I'm listing the house while we're going to sell it. I'll be starting the process in the next couple of weeks." The room went so still I could hear the refrigerator hum. Ryan blinked, then laughed once like he thought I was joking. "That's what we've been saying, Dad." "Good. We can start looking at options." I shook my head. "No. You can start looking at options. I'm going to need you to make plans to move out once we're under contract. There will be a timeline and we'll follow it." Linda's face tightened. "Move out," she repeated slow. "Mike, what are you talking about?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain the last 30 years. I didn't bring up what I'd heard outside the window. I didn't mention the words useless or options. I didn't hand them my pain like a weapon. I just said the truth. This house is in my name. I'm the one selling it. I'm not moving. You are. Ryan's chair scraped back a fraction. "That's not how this works," he said. "Dad, come on. This is family." Linda's eyes flashed. "We built this together," she said. Emily's breath caught a small sound like she wanted to speak, but didn't know which side of herself to use. I looked at each of them one at a time and kept my voice level. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what's happening. We'll handle it properly. You'll have time to make arrangements. But the decision is made." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary stated out loud. For a long moment, nobody moved. Ryan's jaw worked like he was chewing on anger. Linda stared at me as if I had become a stranger. Emily looked down at the table, then back up, and I saw something there that hadn't been there before. Not pity, not contempt. Uncertainty. I stood, picked up my plate, and carried it to the sink. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired in a clean way, like a man who has finally put down something heavy. Behind me, I heard Ryan's chair shove back hard. "You can't do this," he said. I rinsed the plate slowly and set it in the dish rack. "I already have," I said, and turned off the faucet. That was the first time in years I spoke a decision without leaving room for debate. And as the silence spread through my kitchen, I realized I had just stepped into a version of my life none of them had planned for. The kitchen felt different after that, like the air had been rearranged, and nobody knew where to put their hands. Ryan was the first one to move. He paced from the table to the living room and back, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to shake off a bad dream. Linda stayed in her chair, spine straight, eyes hard, the way she got when she thought the right posture could win an argument. Emily remained still, watching me like she was trying to decide if I was bluffing. Ryan stopped in front of the sink, close enough that I could smell the cologne he wore when he had something to prove. "You're really doing this," he said. I dried my hands with a towel, folded it once, and set it on the counter. "Yes." He let out a sharp breath and pointed toward the hallway, like the house itself was evidence. "This is where we live. Mom lives here. Emily comes here. You can't just toss people out because you're in some mood." I looked at him and kept my voice calm. "It's not a mood. It's a decision." Linda finally spoke, and her tone shifted from stiff to cutting in one sentence. "So this is your revenge. You're punishing us because we were trying to help you." "Help me," I repeated, not as a challenge, but like I was testing the word for meaning. She set her wineglass down too hard. The sound jumped in the quiet. "You know what I mean. We were planning for reality. You're not young anymore, Michael. This house is too much for you. We were trying to make it easier." Emily's hands started to tremble slightly. She hid them under the table, then pulled her phone out again, like it was a life raft. "Dad," she said softer, "I don't understand. You said the house is in your name. How do you know that? Did you check? Did you talk to someone?" I nodded once. "I did." Ryan's face changed. The anger was still there, but now there was something underneath it, a flicker of worry. He was a salesman. He knew when the room had shifted, and for the first time all night, he realized he might not be the one in control of it. "Who did you talk to?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was afraid to say it, but because I wasn't interested in dragging names into their panic. I wasn't building a team against them. I was building a life that didn't require their approval. "A professional," I said. Linda stood up fast enough that her chair scraped the floor. Her voice rose, not a shout, but close. "You went behind my back." I met her eyes. "You planned my future without me. I didn't call that behind your back. I called it catching up." For a second she looked like she might slap me, not with her hand, but with a sentence. Then her expression softened, and the change was almost more disturbing than the anger. "Mike," she said, dropping her voice into the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, "think about what you're doing. You're going to tear this family apart." Ryan jumped in immediately. "And how does that look? You know people talk. You know the neighborhood. You want to be the guy who kicks his wife and kids out." "Kids," I said, and something in my chest tightened. Ryan was 35. Emily was 33. They were old enough to have mortgages and mistakes and consequences, but they were still using the word like it gave them protection. Emily's eyes filled not with tears yet, but with fear. "Dad, if you sell the house, where are we supposed to go?" The question was honest in a way nothing else that night had been. It wasn't about my feelings or my health. It was about security. Theirs. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, keeping my hands on the table where they could see I wasn't shaking. "You have time," I said. "This is not happening tomorrow. There will be a process. But you need to start planning like adults." Ryan leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "This is insane. You're acting like we're strangers." I let that sit for a moment, then answered carefully. "No. I'm acting like I matter." The room went quiet again. Linda's mouth tightened, and I saw it the moment she realized I wasn't coming back to the old rules. There was no magic sentence that would make me apologize for having a spine. Over the next few days, the panic didn't fade. It spread. Ryan called the next morning. His voice was sharp and clipped like he had rehearsed. "Dad, I talked to someone. You can't just do this. There are laws. There's marital property. Mom has rights. I told him Thomas Reed would be handling the legal details and that any questions could go through him. I didn't say it with pride. I said it the way I used to tell contractors to call the project manager instead of trying to corner me in a hallway." Linda tried a different angle. That afternoon, she made my favorite lunch and set it in front of me like an offering. "Michael," she said, "we can talk about this. We can compromise. Maybe we don't sell. Maybe we just reorganize. Maybe we put something in writing for the kids. You don't need to go nuclear." Nuclear was her word. It told me everything. To her, the house had already been allocated. My refusal was the attack. Emily came by that evening alone. She didn't bring her phone out right away. She sat on the edge of the couch, knees tucked in, looking smaller than she had any right to look at 33. "Dad," she said, "are you mad at me?" I studied her face. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I heard you. I wanted to make her feel the sting I'd been swallowing. But anger would have been a gift. It would have let her believe this was emotional and temporary. I said, "I'm disappointed." Her breath caught, and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," she whispered. That was the problem, I thought. It sounded exactly like what it was. A few days later, I ran into Daniel Brooks at the grocery store. He was still built like a man who'd spent decades around heavy equipment. Shoulders wide, hair cut short, eyes alert. We'd worked together on and off for years, and he was one of the few people who never treated my retirement like an expiration date. He looked at me pushing a cart and nodded. "Heard you're selling the big place," he said. I stopped. The news had moved faster than I expected. "You heard that," I said. Daniel snorted. "Karen Mills runs a better information network than the cable company. People are saying you got pushed out." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "People can say what they want." Daniel studied me for a second. Then his expression shifted, something firm settling in. "If anybody asks," he said, "tell them you're doing what you should have done a long time ago. And if they ask me, I'll tell them the same." He said it without drama, like it was a fact, like he was correcting a bad measurement on a blueprint. On my way out, the cashier asked if I was doing all right. In the parking lot, a woman I'd seen at neighborhood barbecues waved and gave me a look that wasn't pity this time. It was curiosity, maybe even respect. The story had started to change, not because I defended myself, but because I stopped acting like I deserved to be handled. That night, Ryan showed up again alone, and he wasn't yelling. He looked tired the way a man looks when his usual tactics stop working. "Dad," he said at the door, "we need to talk, like really talk." I stepped back and let him in. Not because I was backing down, but because I wanted to see what came next when the panic ran out of places to hide. I stepped back and let him in, not because I was backing down, but because I wanted to see what came next when the panic ran out of places to hide. Ryan stood in my entryway with his hands shoved into his pockets, eyes scanning the house like he was seeing it for the first time. The anger was still there, but it had thinned into something else, something that looked a lot like fear. He cleared his throat. "Dad." He said I didn't mean what I said. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the light over the sink, and waited for him to follow. He did slow, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed. That told me more than any apology. When he sat at the table, he kept his shoulders tight. He looked younger in that moment, not because he was a kid, but because he was finally in a room where his voice didn't carry the most weight. I poured myself a glass of water. I didn't offer him anything. You didn't mean it, I said. Or you didn't mean for me to hear it. Ryan's jaw worked. He stared at the grain of the table. I was frustrated. Things have been hard. You know that. I did know. Not because he had shared it with me, but because I'd watched him build a life on confidence and assumed it would hold forever. He had the job, the car, the talk. But confidence is expensive when it's the only thing you own. What exactly is hard? I asked. He swallowed. The market is weird. Clients are nervous. Commissions are not what they used to be. And Emily, she's all over the place. Mom's stressed. We thought if we sold, if we moved, we could make it simpler. That word again, like it was a blanket they could pull over everything. You thought I said that moving me out would make it simpler. Ryan's eyes lifted. For a second, the old defensiveness flashed. It wasn't like that. I watched him, kept my voice steady. Then tell me what it was like. He opened his mouth, then shut it. His hands tightened together, fingers weaving and unweaving. He looked toward the hallway, toward the bedroom, toward the parts of the house where family pictures lined the walls like proof of a story we told ourselves. Finally, he said softer. We didn't think you needed all this. You're retired. You don't even use half the rooms. And Mom said you'd be happier somewhere smaller. Mom said. Not you asked. Not you listened. Mom said. I nodded once. Ryan, this isn't about rooms. It's about respect. His face hardened, and there it was, the pivot, the attempt to regain footing. Respect goes both ways, Dad. You just told us to get out. I didn't flinch. I told you to start planning. I told you the house will be sold. I did not say you were being thrown into the street tomorrow. You hear what you want to hear because it makes you the victim. Ryan stared at me like he wasn't used to being spoken to that way in my house. I could see the fight rising in him, and I could also see him swallow it down. Maybe because he finally understood I wasn't afraid of his anger anymore. He rubbed his face with both hands. What do you want? He asked. What do you want us to do? I heard the question underneath the words. Tell me how to fix this without losing what I thought was mine. I said, I want you to stop acting like I'm a problem to manage. I want you to stop planning my life like I'm already gone. Ryan leaned back, exhaled hard. I'll talk to Emily, he said. I'll talk to Mom. We can slow this down. We can talk. We can find a compromise. There it was again, compromise, the word people use when they mean, let us keep something we've already taken. I shook my head. The decision is made. Ryan's eyes widened. You're really going through with it? Yes. He stared at me for a long moment, then stood up so quickly his chair scraped. Fine, he said. Do what you want. He walked to the door without looking back. At the threshold, he paused not long or just long enough for the boy he used to be to surface for a second. I didn't think you'd do this, he said, and there was something raw in it. Neither did I answered. After he left, the house felt too quiet. Not the soft quiet of peace, but the hard quiet of a room after the music stops. I locked the door, checked it twice, then stood with my forehead against the wood, like I was grounding myself. The next day, Linda didn't speak to me at breakfast. She moved around the kitchen as if I was furniture. Emily didn't come by. Ryan didn't call. It was like they had decided silence would punish me back into place. A week later, Thomas called and told me the listing paperwork was ready whenever I was. I met him at his office, signed what needed to be signed, and let the process begin. Photos were scheduled for the following Tuesday. Showings would start the week after that. When I came home, Linda was sitting in the living room with her arms folded. "So you really did it," she said. I set my keys on the counter. "I told you I would." Her eyes flashed, then softened. She stood and took a step toward me. "Michael," she said, "listen. We can still stop this. We can still talk like adults." I almost laughed at that. We can talk like adults after months of talking about me like I wasn't in the room. I kept my voice low. "If you wanted to talk, you would have talked before you started making plans for where I'd end up." Her mouth trembled, and for a second I thought I saw fear, real fear, not fear of losing the house, but fear of losing the story where she could control the narrative. Then the fear turned into blame. "You're selfish," she said. "After everything I've done after all these years, you're going to humiliate us." "Humiliate," I repeated. "You mean you're worried what Karen Mills will say?" Linda's face tightened. She knew her name had slipped into the conversation without being invited. She turned away like she was offended by my accuracy. Over the next month, the house filled with strangers. People walked through the rooms with polite smiles and quiet judgments. They opened closet doors. They peered into corners. They asked questions about the roof and the foundation and the neighborhood schools, as if they were deciding whether my life was worth purchasing. Linda stayed upstairs when showings happened, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Emily came once furious and demanded to know why I was doing this to her. She stood in the kitchen, voice shaking. "Do you know how this looks? Do you know what people will think?" I looked at her and felt something give way inside me, something I had been holding on to because she was my daughter. "People will think what they want," I said. "The question is why you care more about that than what you did." Emily's face flushed. She opened her phone like she was going to show me something, then stopped. Her hand fell to her side and she whispered, "I didn't do anything." That was the lie she needed to live with herself. I let it hang in the air. I didn't argue. There are moments when arguing only helps the person who refuses to see. The offers came in quickly. The market was still strong, and the house showed well, even with the tension soaked into the walls. Thomas and the realtor handled the numbers. I chose the cleanest offer, not the highest, because I wanted the timeline clear and the contingencies simple. The day the contract was signed, Ryan stopped answering my texts entirely. Emily sent me a message late at night, long and twisting. Half apology, half accusation. She said she felt abandoned. She said I was choosing pride over family. She said she wished I would just be the dad she remembered. I read it twice, then set the phone down and didn't respond. Linda began packing without a word. She moved through the house with tight movements, pulling dishes from cabinets, wrapping them in newspaper, taping boxes shut. She didn't ask where she would go. She didn't ask where I would go. She acted like the silence was a weapon that would cut me into changing my mind. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday morning. Ryan showed up early, not to help me, but to supervise, eyes hard, jaw clenched. Emily hovered near the stairs with red eyes and her arms wrapped around herself. Linda directed the movers without looking at me once. I stayed out of the way. I carried a few boxes. I kept my hands busy. I let them take what they needed, what was theirs, what they wanted to believe was theirs. When the last box was loaded, Linda paused by the front door. For a second, I thought she might say something, anything, a sentence that belonged to our shared history. She didn't. She walked out into the bright Texas sun and got into her car. The street looked the same as it always had, but the house behind me felt hollow, like a bell that had been struck and left ringing. That night, after the closing appointment was scheduled and the final documents were ready, my phone rang. Linda's name lit up the screen at 11:47. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a text came through, short and cold. "We could have done this differently." I didn't answer. I set the phone face down on the table, took out the last set of papers Thomas had left for me, and signed where my name belonged. Then I walked to the hallway and stood in front of the spare bedroom, the one that had held Ryan's old trophies and Emily's boxes of childhood. It was empty now. I turned the knob, pushed the door closed, and locked it with the small brass key that had hung on my keyring for years. The click was quiet, almost nothing, but it felt like the first sound in a long time that belonged to me. I stood there with the key in my hand, and I realized winning wasn't loud. It was just lonely in a way nobody warns you about. Morning came in through the front windows, softer than I expected. The house felt different without other people sleeping in it, not empty exactly, just honest. I made coffee and drank it slowly at the kitchen table, listening to the sounds I had ignored for years. The refrigerator hum, the tick of the wall clock, my own breathing steady and unremarkable. For a long time I had measured my worth by how much I was needed. Who needed a ride? Who needed money? Who needed a problem fixed before it became a problem? When that need faded, I assumed I had faded with it. Sitting there alone, I realized how wrong that had been. Being needed is not the same as being valued. It just feels similar when you are too tired to tell the difference. I walked through the house one last time, not as an owner or a husband or a father trying to hold things together, but as a man taking stock of where he had been. I touched the door frame, where the pencil marks still showed how tall Ryan had been at different ages. I stood in the hallway where Emily used to sit on the floor doing homework, her back against the wall, asking me questions I pretended to know the answers to. None of that was erased. It was just finished. Later that afternoon, I met Thomas at his office to finalize the last details. We shook hands and talked about practical things. Dates, accounts, what would happen next. He treated me the same way he always had, like a man capable of making his own decisions. It struck me how rare that had become in my life. On the drive home, I passed the grocery store where Daniel Brooks had stood up for me without asking for anything in return. I thought about the people who had quietly respected me all along, the ones who never questioned whether I mattered because they never needed to use me to feel secure. When I got back to the house, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. It was shorter than the last one. She said she hoped I was doing okay. She said she missed how things used to be. She did not apologize. She did not accuse. It felt like a step, but not a bridge. I typed a response and deleted it. Then I typed another and deleted that too. In the end, I put the phone down and let the silence stand. Sometimes the most honest answer is time. That evening, Linda came by to pick up the last of her things. She did not knock. She had her key. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a small space. When she finished loading her car, she stood by the door and looked at me. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. I believed that she believed it. "I know," I said, "but intent does not erase impact." She nodded once, like she wanted to argue and knew she could not. Then she left without another word. After she drove away, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the weight of everything settle. There was no rush of triumph, no surge of relief, just a quiet understanding that what I had done was irreversible, and that was exactly why it mattered. For years, I had confused patience with permission. I thought that staying calm and agreeable made me strong. I thought endurance was the same as dignity. What I learned instead was that silence can be generous or it can be surrender. I had been surrendering without realizing it. People had called me useless directly and indirectly. Not because I lacked value, but because I stopped defending it. I let others decide what my life should look like because I was afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of being alone, afraid of being the problem. What I did was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was a line drawn where one should have been drawn years earlier. A reminder to myself that respect is not something you earn once and keep forever. It is something you maintain sometimes by walking away. The day before the closing, I packed a small bag and loaded it into my truck. I did not know exactly where I would go next. A short rental near the lake, maybe. A place with fewer rooms and more light. Somewhere quiet enough to hear myself think. I stood on the porch and looked back at the house. It had held a lot of life. It had held love and arguments and ordinary days that only matter when they are gone. I felt grateful for it. I also felt ready to leave it behind. When I turned the key in the lock for the last time, I did it without ceremony. No speech. No dramatic pause. Just the simple action of closing one door and opening another. Freedom, I found, does not feel like celebration. It feels like space. If you have listened this far, you probably recognize parts of yourself in this story. Maybe you have been quiet to keep the peace. Maybe you have been called difficult when you finally spoke up. Maybe you have wondered if the years you gave were noticed at all. If that is you, I hope you remember this. Your value does not disappear when you stop being convenient. It does not shrink because someone else wants more control. You are allowed to take your life back without apologizing for it. If you feel like sharing your own story, I would like to hear it. Not the version where you look perfect, but the one where you finally chose yourself. And if you want to stay here for more stories like this, stories about losing and finding and learning what really matters, you are welcome to stay a while longer. I am still figuring out what comes next. But for the first time in a long time, the road ahead feels like it belongs to me.